Yes, it was something of a self-exposure, but I couldn't resist. 30 minutes on the Concept C2 rowing machine, then another half hour on the treadmill. That's how I've been working out for the past 9 months, changing only the music. I didn't own a smartphone, but I had an old MP3 player filled with anything I could find to drown out the anger. Well, I suppose I should say to drown out the pain, but each day the anger seemed to swell, overshadowing any pain I felt. My mind conjured up scenarios of revenge as heavy metal blasted in my ears, obscuring the reality around me. Both exercise routines were almost robotic, requiring no conscious thought or focus. For 1 hour each day, I drifted in a self-induced trance, consumed by fury over my wife's betrayal. After a quick shower at the gym, I embarked on my 3-mile walk to work. Driving would have been more practical, but I found solace in the therapeutic nature of walking. It typically took me 58 minutes, sometimes a bit longer if the weather was unfavorable. It wasn't a brisk pace, but it kept my heart rate up. After work, I leisurely walked the 2 miles back home. Weekends disrupted my routine, but I filled the time by tackling extra chores around the house. I spent more hours mowing, pruning, and edging. Neglected tasks suddenly demanded attention. Painting and caulking became my new focus, serving as ways to occupy my time. My MP3 player was my constant companion through it all. I made a comfortable living as a Volvo mechanic, specializing in commercial diesel applications. I kept my certifications up to date, and the money was enough to put both my daughters through college. Instead of burdening them with student loans, we opted for a second mortgage to cover tuition costs. My marital issues stemmed from a seemingly innocuous source: music. My wife, Rachel, adored classical music, a genre I couldn't stand. For her sake, I tried for years to embrace it, but it never clicked. Having different musical tastes shouldn't have been enough to tear apart a marriage, but Rachel took it further. She found companionship with others who shared her musical passion, joining local musical groups and associations. Concert trips became routine, and she signed up for as many as she could, never once inviting me along. When these outings turned into overnight stays, I began to grow suspicious. Kalev Jurison, a pianist who taught at the local college and performed with various orchestras, was the object of Rachel's infatuation. She kept her feelings hidden for a while, but it wasn't difficult for me to piece together that she was his personal travel companion. Armed with evidence, I confronted her. "Honey, we need to talk." To my surprise, she didn't deny a thing. She admitted to everything and more or less shrugged it off with an indifferent attitude. I'm not particularly quick-witted, so her reaction left me speechless. I had anticipated remorse and regret, but instead, I was met with indifference and impertinence. Our lives took a drastic turn in that moment. Initially, I was overwhelmed by grief and sorrow, the pain unbearable, but I held it inside, not saying a word to my daughters or anyone else. Rachel carried on as if nothing had changed, taking care of the house just as she always had. The only difference was that I now slept in the guest room. With Rachel never having worked, she spent all her spare time with her social circle. Despite living under the same roof, we felt more like siblings than spouses. Rachel's outings became more blatant. Pictures in newspapers and local magazines showed her and Kalev together as a couple, with no mention of me or our marriage. As time passed, my pain slowly turned into anger, and that anger grew until it became difficult to contain. I didn't turn to alcohol, I turned to the gym. I shed 46 pounds, getting into the best shape of my life. I no longer needed medication for blood pressure and cholesterol. Supper was the only meal I ate at home, but I easily adjusted to whatever Rachel cooked. But for every pound lost, I gained 10 pounds of bitterness. I was becoming a hateful, miserable person, even driving my friends and coworkers away. Then, I met Franklin. Franklin had been a regular at the gym for about 2 months before I even spoke to him. I usually kept to myself during workouts, rarely socializing. Occasionally, we would nod or exchange a quick fist bump. Franklin was different. Sometimes I caught him talking to himself. With earbuds in, you don't realize when you're singing along or speaking aloud. He noticed me smiling while he was musing one day, and from then on, we developed an easy, casual relationship. We began our workout routine on the treadmill together, gradually transitioning to the rowing machine. He matched my focus, and I found we shared the same drive. Our post-workout coffee sessions turned into occasional lunches, and having Franklin as a friend made everything easier. Finally, I had someone to vent to, but instead of calming me down, it only fueled my frustration. Franklin refused to run on the treadmill or run at all, despite being physically capable. Mentally, he chose not to. His wife, Sarah, was deeply into triathlons, having embarked on a fitness journey 5 years prior. She spent considerable time biking, swimming, and running, often participating in marathons and Ironman competitions, frequently with Kenny Walker, a renowned triathlete. Franklin discovered they were sharing more than just training sessions: transportation, accommodations, meals, and social gatherings. When confronted, Sarah's response was a dismissive "deal with it." Tensions peaked one evening over a rack of ribs, with Rachel in Washington, D.C., and Sarah in Hawaii for the Kona Ironman with Kenny. The ribs lacked the usual enjoyment without a cold beer, so we settled for unsweetened tea instead. "You know, Miles, we're quite the sorry pair of cucks," Franklin said, his tone devoid of humor, his expression somber. "Damn it, Franklin, I'm not a cuckold." "Oh, really? What do you call two guys who know their wives are cheating and just accept it?" I paused, mulling over his words, then motioned for the waitress. "Bring us a couple of long necks, please." "Franklin, I'm not a cuckold. I refuse to be one." "Prove it." "Miles, we're both miserable cucks who try to drown our sorrows in exercise until we're in pain. Do your daughters even know what's going on? When was the last time you talked to them? Does your wife even talk to your daughters? Thank goodness I don't have kids to worry about." I raised the cold Ewingling. "What do you suggest?" Franklin just shrugged and reached for another rib. I began the weekend as usual, with yard work. I had no idea when Rachel was due back, and honestly, I couldn't care less. I assumed she would be staying over the weekend. After a light lunch, I met Franklin at the gym. Sarah wouldn't be back for another 5 days. She fed Franklin some story about triathletes needing to decompress before flying, which he knew was mostly nonsense but didn't bother challenging. Our gym session ended abruptly. "I've had it. Damn it, I just can't and won't do this anymore," I exclaimed. Franklin grabbed his towel and headed for the showers. By the time I finished rowing, he was dressed and rushing out the door. He was right. We needed to do something. I spent all of Sunday planning, coming up with ideas and discarding them just as quickly. The best idea seemed to be to disappear altogether, but it left me feeling empty. I needed some form of revenge, but against whom? It had to be all of them. 4 different people had to be dealt with. Physically, I could never harm Rachel. It wasn't in my nature. I was pretty sure Franklin felt the same way about Sarah, but the 2 guys were a different story. Murder was out of the question, but how could I inflict meaningful pain upon them? Suddenly, everything became clear. I made a quick trip to the garage and found what I needed: a ball-peen hammer. Rachel came home Sunday evening, glowing. She unpacked, showered, and so on, but didn't share any details of her weekend with me. I didn't bring it up. After she went to bed, I stayed up to watch TV. "Miles, I refuse to do it. You're out of your mind. No matter how bad things are, I won't kill anyone." "No, Franklin, listen to me. We're not going to kill anybody. We're just going to slow them down a bit." "That's not what it sounds like. I've seen that movie, Strangers on a Train. Farley Granger and the other guy turn out to be killers. What you're suggesting is the same thing. I won't do it, Miles. It was Farley Granger, not William Bendix, and we're not going to kill anybody. Why are we even doing this, and what will it achieve?" "All right, Franklin, why is your wife so drawn to this guy? What does he have that you don't that makes her want him?" "You know exactly what it is. He's a top-tier athlete. I can't compete with that. I'm just a forklift driver, and an overweight one at that." "So he's using his status as a world-class athlete to seduce and steal your wife. Do you think that's fair?" "No. Franklin, this guy thinks he's so superior that he can take any woman he wants. That's the ultimate disrespect, and you're just going to let him get away with it. Miles, I can't confront him. That's the point. You don't have to. I will. And what's the catch? Well, there's a world-famous piano virtuoso who might need some professional chiropractic treatment on his fingers. Can you handle that? It depends. Do I have to use a ball-peen hammer? Franklin, use anything you damn well please. So, we had a deal. Franklin was still a bit hesitant, so I suggested I deal with Kenny first to ease his nerves before he tackled Kalev. We spent another 2 hours over a rack of ribs, exchanging personal information. There were many gaps in our plan. The problem was, neither of us had a clue what we were doing or how to do it. Kenny posed the biggest challenge because of his physical prowess. I figured I needed some kind of equalizer. With this new project consuming me, I forgot all about my wife and her lover. I took 10 days of accrued vacation time, all aimed at Kenny Walker. It turned out to be much more intricate than I thought. He had a regular 9-to-5 job as an insurance adjuster, but his daily routine was far from simple. Some days he spent hours biking whenever he could find the time. Most mornings he jogged, and 3 evenings a week he swam laps at the local YMCA until the pool closed. On rainy days, he hit the gym. And of course, 2 or 3 times a week, he rendezvoused with Sarah at his apartment. While I was occupied tailing Kenny, Franklin was keeping tabs on Kalev. We regularly met at the gym to work out, but we never discussed our progress. We didn't even exchange phone numbers. That was part of the plan. The only connection we shared was being members of the same gym. Time was ticking away, and I needed to make some solid plans. Kenny used different bike routes all the time, and he never jogged the same course consistently. The best opportunity I could find was catching him at the YMCA after his swim. He always parked his car at the back of the building. I spent a considerable amount of time scouting for CCTV cameras. I found a few at the front and along the side, but none at the back. I discreetly acquired a taser from Craigslist, but I wasn't sure if it worked or how to test it. It was a risk I had to take. At least it came with an instruction manual. Feeling a bit bold, I splurged on a $10 balaclava. After about 30 minutes on the treadmill, chatting about trivial matters, I decided it was time to get down to business. Franklin, I think you need to take a 10-day vacation as soon as possible. I don't need to know where you're going, but you have to give me the dates. Wherever you go, use your credit cards a lot, I said. By the time we finished another 30 minutes on the Concept C2 rower, Franklin was beaming. Now I had to figure out where I was going to be during that time. The rain fell steadily, dampening everything in its path. It was nearing 10 o'clock, and Kenny Walker would soon arrive through the rear entrance of the YMCA. His Outback was the lone vehicle in the rear lot. I double-checked, finding no CCTV cameras in sight. Just in case, I donned a balaclava. Kenny was visibly annoyed at the sight of his flat tire. The taser did its job perfectly, and within 5 minutes, I was on my way home. The incident didn't make the morning paper, but the evening news mentioned a local man being assaulted and injured behind the YMCA the previous night. Plans were underway to install CCTV cameras in the area to prevent further incidents, though the nature of the injuries wasn't disclosed. There were no leads on suspects or motives. I had no clue about Franklin's whereabouts or return date. I disposed of the ball-peen hammer, taser, and balaclava in 3 different dumpsters downtown. My boss wasn't pleased when I informed him I'd be attending a 3-week Volvo Pentatrain course in Orlando. He failed to see how a marine engine course would benefit the company. I assured him I'd foot the bill and use my accrued vacation time, but he remained discontent. I left a note in Franklin's gym locker, explaining my absence until the end of June. Rachel, I have to head to Orlando for a 3-week training stint. Do you want to come with me, or would you rather stay home and relax? Miles, the summer concert season is in full swing, and you know how much I enjoy those park events. I'd really rather stay here. Besides, you'll be in class most of the time anyway, right? Yeah, it can get pretty muggy down there in the summer. I get it. I just wanted to check. Thanks, honey. I appreciate the offer, but I'll probably be more comfortable here. Maybe we can plan a short trip later in the summer, like a weekend getaway to New England or something. As expected, the conversation unfolded just as I thought it would. Now on to the next phase of the plan. There were no further updates about Kenny Walker. I departed at daybreak on Saturday, aiming for a 2-day journey to Orlando, with a planned stop at the Tennessee Aquarium in Chattanooga. It's essential to keep our priorities straight. Fortunately, the school had arrangements for long-term rentals with light cooking facilities, so I wouldn't have to eat out every day. I called Rachel to let her know I arrived safely. The local newspaper charged $1 a month for online access, which I took care of as soon as I settled in. Starting tomorrow, I'd meticulously check all the news from home, especially the police reports. I was eager to see if Franklin would hold up his end of the agreement, and whether he faced any repercussions from the police regarding the Walker incident. There was a Planet Fitness less than a mile away, and I made use of my guest privilege card. The first week of my vacation was dull, but the second week brought some interesting events, and the third week was fantastic. Of course, I'm not referring to my school training, which was excellent. I read the entire paper daily, searching for anything of interest. There was a concert at the Brandywine Battlefield site, organized by my wife's lover. I'm sure she enjoyed that little outing. Towards the end of the following week, there was a front-page article about the brutal attack on Caleb Jurison, a local university professor and symphony orchestra director. The police suspected it was some kind of professional vendetta, as the only injuries he sustained were to his hands. Although it was compared to the recent attack on Kenny Walker, they couldn't establish a direct link. There were no suspects at the time. I spent the rest of the evening contemplating with a 6-pack of Black and Tan, trying to unravel where, when, and how Franklin pulled it off. I didn't really want to know, but it was amusing to speculate. The next morning, a Volvo Penta school administrator informed me that an official from Pennsylvania had called to confirm my attendance, and that I hadn't missed any classes. I wouldn't have expected any less. I wondered when my wife would mention it to me. I hadn't heard from her in a few days. In anticipation of her call, I bought another 6-pack, but the call never came. The final week of training turned out to be the highlight. We had half a day of interviews with potential employers, which was a pleasant surprise. Any offer would have been welcome to me. My age, experience, and willingness to relocate gave me a bit of an edge over most of the other students. I received the offer I wanted, making my decision easy. I decided to make a short stop on my way home to check it out. There were no further articles in the newspaper about the mysterious attacks, and Rachel never called again. The Perdido Bay Marina was technically in Alabama, but you would see Florida across the water. Thomas Coleman eagerly showed me around his pride and joy. In addition to overhauls and repairs, they had a large multi-level storage facility. Interspersed with the dock spaces were half a dozen liveaboards. The highlight was a small mobile home at the back of the lot, which he offered for my use. I asked him about the storage facility, which he said was popular with snowbirds. After explaining its operation, he jokingly asked if I had any forklift experience. Immediately, Franklin came to mind. Returning home was somewhat underwhelming. I received a quick hug and a kiss on the cheek from my wife, Rachel. I tried to start some light conversation, but Rachel only responded with small talk. She didn't mention Caleb at all. I didn't press the issue, but I couldn't help but smile to myself. After showering and changing, we enjoyed a light meal. Despite being away for 25 days, it felt like I had never left. I was looking forward to hitting the gym in the morning. Franklin was already there when I arrived. "Morning, Franklin." "Morning, Miles." We worked out for about 20 minutes without saying a word, which felt a bit odd. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Coffee, Franklin." "Damn. I thought you'd never ask." We didn't even bother showering or changing. We just grabbed our stuff and went across the street to Mickey D's. "So, Miles, how's everything on your end?" "Quiet. It's like I never left. If I hadn't read about what happened in the paper, I wouldn't have known anything." "How about you?" "Just the opposite. Sarah's furious and taking it out on me. The police cleared me completely, but she's convinced I had something to do with his attack. She's spending more time at his place playing nurse than at home. She even stayed over a couple of nights. In a way, it's sort of relaxing. I enjoy my time away from her more than with her. You did a pretty good job on him. His triathlon days are over. I wasn't sure. I never read anything about his injuries. Did the police hassle you? Oh, yeah. They checked my phone records and bank accounts, trying to connect me to his attack. After about a week, they gave up. Sarah was the one pushing to have me charged. Just curious, where did you go? I was on a Windjammer cruise out of Rockland, Maine. Had a blast. Good for you. I was stuck in a classroom for 8 hours a day for 3 weeks. Now what, Miles? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm out of here. I've got a job near Pensacola lined up, and I'm leaving at the end of the week. Are you divorcing her? Nope, I'm just taking off. If she wants a divorce, she can file for it. I'm curious to see if good old Kalev will step up and take her in, or if he'll dump her. What about your house and stuff? I'm leaving her everything except the money in the bank. She gets the mortgage, car payments, utility bills, and her Kohl's credit card. Gives me something to think about. You'll let me know where you end up, right? Sure. By the way, did Kalev give you many trouble? Not really. I sprayed the garage cameras with wasp spray the day before and used a meat mallet from the kitchen to finish the job. One quick hit to the head and then a half-dozen smashes on each hand. I made sure to get both of his thumbs. He never saw me. He was still out when I left. Rachel wasn't home when I returned from the gym. I took a quick shower and headed into work. My boss wasn't happy when I gave my notice. I emptied all the bank accounts, except for a few $100s, and closed out the credit cards. We usually kept a zero balance on the cards. After another quiet dinner with my wife, I grabbed a beer and headed for the den. I dug out my passport, birth certificate, and my DD-214. There was nothing else I wanted to take with me. My tools from work were in the back of the Subaru. The only thing left to get was some clothes and my laptop. Rachel was cordial, but still very quiet and reserved. She left early the next morning without telling me where she was going. She stopped giving me updates on her whereabouts over a year ago. I guess she felt I didn't need to know. It took me less than 30 minutes to load the Outback. At the last minute, I grabbed the Samuel Campbell. It just seemed like a good idea. I was on US 81 just outside of Luray when I decided to let Franklin know that I left. It was a short text message. Perdido Bay Marina. Whatever he decided to do was fine with me. It only took me a few weeks to get settled in. My cell was turned off the entire time. The work was different, but the same, if that makes any sense. Most of my spare time was spent getting the trailer livable. Everything worked okay, but it did need a bit of love and attention. The second bedroom became a junk catching area. There was a small diner about a quarter mile down the road from the marina that was open 24/7. I found myself eating most of my meals there. Unfortunately, the closest gym was 7 miles away, so I decided to take up jogging. I didn't like it, but I did it anyhow. At least there were no hills. And then my first guest arrived. Franklin, you found it. Not too hard, Miles. The GPS brought me right to it. Darren's your uncle. Who in the world is Darren? I wondered. Are you just passing through or are you staying? Staying, if you've got room. Nothing to go back to. We spent about an hour getting Franklin set up in the second bedroom, then grabbed some supper at the diner. Franklin had driven straight through 16 hours and was dead tired. I let him sleep in the next morning. Thomas Coleman hired Franklin on the spot. He hated using the forklifts and was more than happy to turn it over. The pay wasn't great, but Franklin didn't seem to mind. He just wanted enough to get by. He did have a stash of cash that he brought with him. I took him to Foley later to get a safety deposit box at the same bank that I used. The trailer wasn't that secure. Sarah had kept insisting to the police that Franklin was responsible for the attack on Kenny Walker. They couldn't prove anything. His alibi in Maine was rock solid, and they could find no accomplices. Naturally, the relationship between the two of them went downhill fast. Sarah demanded that Franklin get out of the house, but he refused. She finally moved in with Walker, and 2 days later, Franklin made his break. I decided it was time to reach out to my daughters. My first call was to my eldest, Joyce. As soon as I said hello, she hung up. Kelly, my youngest, was a bit more open. She called me an inconsiderate bastard before hanging up. My attempt failed miserably, but at least I won't be stuck with 2 expensive weddings down the line. I turned my cell back off. Franklin and I quickly settled into a routine. Every morning, I jogged about 5 miles, then we met at the diner for breakfast. They made a nice little low-carb breakfast bowl just for me. We caught lunch when it was convenient. A couple of weeks later, things changed. Linda Adams had been living in a Nordic tug in Slip 16 for the past 6 months. She had no land transportation to speak of, so Franklin was more than happy to offer her a lift when she had to go someplace. I soon lost my dinner companion, and shortly thereafter, my breakfast partner. It was only a short time later when the second bedroom in the trailer became a junk room again. Franklin was happy, and I was happy for him. Every time I tried to talk to him about her, he became evasive. Thomas Coleman wasn't much help either. He was just pleased that she paid her dock fees and utilities on time. She never asked for any type of special treatment. Something was going on, but as long as Franklin was happy, I would keep my nose out of it. I seemed to lose track of time. It had been almost a year since I left. I had no contact with my wife, my daughters, or anyone else from home. Occasionally, Franklin, Linda, and I would go out for supper, and we always had a good time. I was able to figure out that Linda was from Ohio, a military wife with no children. She never mentioned her husband, and I was not about to ask. Linda always wanted to go to Foley or Gulf Shores to eat but refused to go to Pensacola. It was an odd quirk, but I accepted it. It was a rainy Monday morning when things came to a head. Instead of my usual jog, I put on my old army poncho and lumbered over to the diner. I was just finishing up my second cup of coffee when I saw a familiar car pull into the marina. It was the green Subaru Outback that belonged to Kenny Walker. A woman who appeared to be Sarah got out, opened an umbrella, and dashed for the marina office. A minute later, she opened the door and waved to the driver. Kenny got out and limped into the office, trying unsuccessfully to dodge the raindrops. "Damn it, Franklin. Answer your phone." Finally, I got a response. "Franklin, you've got a problem. How soon can you cast off and get the hell out of here?" "What the hell are you talking about? Slow down. Your wife is here, and Kenny Walker is with her. They are in the office talking to Thomas right now. It's your choice. You can speak with her, or you can quietly sneak away. I think the rain would give you pretty good cover. Miles, it's going to take me at least 15 or 20 minutes. Can you delay them a bit?" "I'll try. Get your butt moving." My next call was to Thomas. He chuckled slightly as he agreed to redirect the interlopers to my trailer instead of Linda's slip. I arrived back at the trailer just as they were leaving the office. Naturally, I invited them in and did my best to prolong the interaction. I engaged in casual conversation with a man whom I had attacked less than a year ago, leaving him maimed and crippled, hoping my newly acquired facial hair would shield my identity. They never mentioned why they were there or their search for Franklin, and I didn't inquire. The rain had eased to a gray drizzle as we strolled to the docks. The tugboat was barely visible across the bay through the mist, but I was the only one paying attention. They were fixated on the empty slip. 5 minutes later, the ship had vanished completely. I never disclosed my identity or explained my connection to Franklin. They didn't inquire. I made an excuse to return to work, and shortly after, they left. That was the last time I saw Franklin. A few months later, Phil Adams, Linda's brother-in-law, paid us a visit. He was searching for Wayne, Linda's husband, with whom he hadn't been in contact for over a year. Wayne and Linda were living at the Blackwater Bay Marina in Pensacola. There had been several reports of domestic disturbances involving the couple filed with the Escambia County Sheriff's Department, but then they abruptly ceased. Despite this, Wayne's retirement checks from the U.S. Air Force were still being cashed. Nobody had seen Wayne or Linda for over a year. How Phil tracked Linda down to the marina was a mystery to me. Perhaps it was just a lucky guess. Another 6 months went by, and I found myself missing Franklin. While work remained steady, I was growing tired of it. In the evenings, I would sit with my black and tan, pondering whether I should seek companionship or perhaps relocate. I wasn't keen on the bar scene, and church wasn't my thing. The gym was inconvenient, and none of the waitresses at the diner caught my interest enough to consider dating. Finally, I decided to reach out to Volvo Penta again. They had two promising job openings, one in Biloxi and the other in Galveston. I couldn't make up my mind between the two. During lunch, as I was grappling with my decision, I was rudely interrupted. "Hello, Miles. You're a hard man to find." Rachel looked worn out, aged by the hardships of the last 2 years. "Sorry, I wasn't hiding." "What brings you here?" I replied, surprised. She slid an envelope across the table. "Your final divorce papers. I thought you might want them. I filed for abandonment after a year. If you knew where I was, why drive down here? You could have just mailed them." "I don't know. Closure, I guess. You screwed me over bad, but I guess I deserved it." "That wasn't my intention. I just wanted to get away so you could be with Kalev. I felt like I was holding you back." "Well, you didn't leave me with much. No money and an over-mortgaged house that the bank ended up taking. What really pissed me off is that you took the Samuel Campbell. I figured your lover could take up the slack. Where is he, by the way?" Things didn't go well for Kalev after his accident. He went back to Estonia about 6 months ago. "You didn't go with him?" "I wasn't invited." I didn't respond. Kalev was a bit bitter. He felt that you had something to do with his attack. Things seemed to cool between us after that. "Now what?" "Joyce got married last June and they relocated to Ocala. I'm going to move in with them and play grandmom. I decided to take a short detour on the way to deliver your papers." Silly me. I sat there like a fool waiting for some sort of apology, but none came. It was as if she was still rubbing it in my face after all that time. There was no remorse or regret on her part. "Well, Rachel, I'm glad you stopped by. I'm sorry I missed Joyce's wedding, but she didn't seem to want me there anyhow. I'm also sorry things didn't work out with you and Kalev. I know how important that was to you. Is there anything else before you go?" "Yes, I want the Samuel Campbell." I settled on Biloxi. It's just a 2-hour drive. The casino seemed like a blast. I handed over the Samuel Campbell, annoyed. The second story. The awareness struck me suddenly, like the light bulb that appears over the heads of cartoon characters when they get a brilliant idea. My third child was not really mine. She was biologically the daughter of another man. I was on the phone with a representative from genealogygurus.com, trying to find out why my daughter's DNA test result hadn't been processed after 10 weeks. I had given her the test as an extra Christmas gift and provided the representative with the relevant numbers so they could locate the test. After a brief 5-minute hold, he returned to assure me that the test had indeed been processed, but emphasized that privacy policies prevented him from divulging any further information since it pertained to the person who submitted the test. "But if the test has been processed, why isn't she showing up in my DNA matches?" I asked, increasingly agitated. "Sir, there are several reasons why your daughter might not be appearing in your DNA matches, but I can't discuss that particular test with you, due to privacy reasons," he responded, sounding somewhat frustrated. And that's when everything clicked. The most obvious reason she wasn't in my matches was that she wasn't actually a biological match. I ended the call in a daze, hitting the red end call button and immediately bursting into tears. The next thing I knew, I woke up curled in a fetal position on the family room sofa. With 15 minutes left on my lunch break, I decided to call my daughter, assuming she might also be on hers, given we worked in the same time zone. Knowing she usually spent her break curled up with a book at her desk, I wasn't too concerned about interrupting her. She picked up on the first ring. "Hey Dad, what's up?" she greeted me, a hint of caution in her voice. "Pumpkin, you know I love and trust you completely, but I know about the DNA test," I bluffed. "I called Genealogy Gurus, and they told me it was processed about 2 weeks ago." There was a sharp intake of breath on her end, followed by a tense silence that stretched for at least 10 seconds. "I know, Dad, we need to talk, but I can't do this here and now. Call me tonight and make sure Mom isn't around when you do." As I drove back to the office, my mind was in a fog. I have to admit, my productivity that afternoon at the engineering firm where I worked was far from stellar. My thoughts were a whirlwind of questions and worries, chief among them the unsettling notion that my little girl might not be mine after all. Being the analytical type, I knew I had to prioritize my thoughts and tackle the problems one at a time. I didn't become a vice president of engineering at Johnson Electronics for nothing. I decided to approach my personal issues the same way I handled project challenges, methodically and systematically. Michael Johnson, the old man himself, had instilled this mindset in me when he hired me straight out of Purdue University to work for his then fledgling company. With Michael at the helm and me by his side, Johnson Electronics had grown into an industry leader, and we both reaped the rewards. I earned a substantial income, enjoyed excellent benefits, and worked alongside exceptionally talented colleagues. Life got even better when I returned home each day to a beautiful, loving wife and our 3 wonderful children. As time went by, the kids grew up, moved out, got married, and started families of their own. Initially, being empty nesters felt a bit lonely, but we found many ways to stay busy, and it seemed like this phase rekindled our bond as a couple. Reflecting on the past month, a few seemingly minor incidents now stand out, particularly a phone call Mia made to my wife about 2 weeks ago. We were both in the family room watching TV on a Tuesday evening when Haley's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, mentioned it was Mia, and answered the call. The conversation was brief, lasting about 5 minutes, with Haley mostly responding with simple yes and no answers. I couldn't help but notice tears forming in her eyes. After the call ended, I asked if everything was all right. Haley mentioned that Mia's cat was having some health issues, but assured me there was nothing to worry about, although she seemed somewhat uneasy around me. It struck me as odd that she was taking the cat's health so personally. That phone call must have been when Mia found out. Haley had no idea I had sent Mia a DNA test kit. I didn't think it was a big deal. Among our 3 children, Mia was the only one interested in genealogy, so I ordered a kit online and sent it to her. I've been exploring our family roots intermittently for years and found the DNA testing particularly fascinating. I thought Mia would find it exciting too. Apparently, I couldn't have been more wrong. When I got home, I made an effort to act normally around Haley, even though I was seething inside. I kept repeating to myself, one problem at a time, one problem at a time. I met Haley at Purdue during my sophomore year. Although we didn't start dating until senior year, once we did, I believed we were inseparable. We got married a year after graduating minus 31 years ago, and until today, I would have said it was the best decision of my life. At 54, she remains beautiful, and despite having 3 children, she stays in shape with the figure of someone in their mid-30s. She is both fun and funny, and until today, I looked forward to spending the rest of my life with her. Around 8 o'clock, I told Haley I needed to call the old man about a project and excused myself. I grabbed a jacket and stepped outside to the porch swing, needing privacy. Then I called Mia. Mia answered on the first ring, sounding absolutely distraught. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know I should have told you earlier, but Mom asked me to wait until she talked to you first. She blurted out before I could even say hello." "I'm not mad at you. Calm down," I replied as soothingly as I could. "I'm not blaming you. You're just as much a victim in this as I am." I could hear her heavy breathing over the phone, knowing how hard this was for her. "Mia, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. I'm still your father, and you're still my pumpkin. I've always given you kids all the love I have, and I'm not about to stop now, unless you want me to." She broke down, sobbing almost incoherently into the phone. "I love you, Daddy. I don't want anyone else but you." "That's my girl. I hate to put you in a tough spot, but you're my best hope for understanding this DNA situation. We'll leave the other issues aside to avoid any conflict. I just need to know, did you find any DNA matches?" "Yeah, Dad, I did," she sighed. Lily Torres showed up as my half-sister. "Lily? Uncle Daniel and Aunt Bella's Lily. Oh, holy crap." "I'm sorry, Daddy," she said softly. "It's not your fault, Pumpkin. You never need to apologize to me." I reassured her, trying to stay composed. This revelation meant that Daniel Torres, Uncle Daniel to my children, appellate court Judge Daniel Torres to everyone else, was Mia's biological father. Damn. That implied my wife had an affair with him when he was still with the law firm Gui Howe and Associates. This went back at least 25 years, considering Mia was 24 years old now. At that time, Haley would have been his administrative assistant. Daniel left the firm a few years later to become a state judge and moved to the capital, where his career really took off. Haley, on the other hand, chose to stay with Gui Howe, eventually becoming the office manager. During the years they worked together, Daniel and his wife Bella became such close friends that our kids call them uncle and aunt, and their kids do the same with us. Several times, when I was away on business trips, Haley and the kids would spend days at Daniel and Bella's lake house. Oh, damn. The kids had often mentioned Aunt Bella taking them places, but never mentioned Uncle Daniel or Haley being with them. I hadn't even thought twice about it. Goddamn. I must have zoned out, because the next thing I knew, Mia was calling me, Daddy, Daddy. Sorry, Pumpkin. I got lost in my thoughts. Thanks for your help, kiddo. Tell Joseph I said hi. Wait, Daddy, what are you going to do? It was a fair question, but I didn't have a clear answer, so I told her straight. I'm not sure, kid. Well, just don't go and do something incredibly stupid, Dad. A little stupid is fine, but don't get yourself arrested or anything. I hadn't considered shooting Haley until that moment, but I promised Mia I wouldn't get arrested, so that option was off the table. I never break promises to my kids. Reassuring Mia about our relationship was my top priority, followed closely by discovering who Haley's accomplice was. The third task was initiating the divorce process by finding a new attorney, since my current one was with the same firm Haley worked at. That arrangement was clearly untenable. Once I secured a reliable lawyer, I'd tackle the issue of the future ex-Mrs. Clark Miller. At home, the atmosphere was frosty. Whenever we were together, Haley chattered incessantly, possibly from nerves. She seemed to be putting in extra effort to keep me happy, maybe hoping to soften the blow when I eventually found out. Who knows? But there was a palpable distance between us, and she certainly wasn't going to break the ice. I met with an attorney about a week later. When he learned my wife was the office manager at Gui Howe, he looked visibly uncomfortable, so I moved on to the next one on my list, a confident young woman in her 20s who just smiled when I mentioned Haley's position at Gui Howe. That's exactly the kind of unflinching attitude I needed, someone who wouldn't be intimidated when one of Gui's top attorneys stepped in to represent my wife. I began recounting what little I knew about the cheating debacle, starting with the bombshell discovery that my youngest child wasn't mine biologically and belonged, in fact, to Judge Torres. Appellate Court Judge Torres, asked my attorney, Avery Young. Yes, the very same, I confirmed, watching her expression closely to see if I needed to find new legal counsel. This should be interesting, she remarked, before directing our attention towards breaking down the financials. Given that both my spouse and I had stable jobs with pensions and solid benefits, Avery recommended a straightforward approach: divide the joint assets equally, keep our respective pensions, and sell a house. This would leave both parties in a comfortable position, though I would fare slightly better due to my higher income and superior pension. Unless, of course, you want to really press her on the grounds of infidelity, the paternity issue, or her general disrespect, she added swiftly, looking momentarily like she was ready to leap onto the conference table to right the wrongs done to me. We'll have our reckoning, but I don't intend to hurt her financially, I replied. And what about the judge? Are we aiming to pursue anything there? That could get complicated and significantly increase your costs, Avery pointed out. The judge is my responsibility. I'll handle him in my own way, I snapped, possibly a bit too harshly. Understood, she replied. If she doesn't contest it, this could be over in 6 months, Avery noted. If she does, we might be looking at more than a year. I don't have any plans requiring a quick resolution, so take the time you need to get it right, I told her. With that out of the way, it was time for the next task, the confrontation. I waited another week, hoping Tracy's head might explode in the meantime. Saturday night was traditionally our date night, followed by a movie and some time in the bedroom. We always went to bed early on Saturdays to make the most of our time together. However, it had been 2 weeks since our last date or any intimacy between us, a result of my inability to get over learning about the affair and Mia. Tracy hadn't even questioned it, an indication she knew I was aware, but was very adept at pretending otherwise. But that chapter was nearing its end. I took Haley to a charming French restaurant. We shared a bottle of wine, indulged in delightful desserts, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a genuine smile on her face. Once we returned home, I gently helped her out of her coat, guided her to the kitchen table, pulled out a chair, and uttered those dreaded words, "We need to talk." Haley gave me a tentative half-smile as I poured myself a Jack Daniels over ice. I offered her a drink from the liquor cabinet, but she declined. Placing my glass on the table, I looked straight into her eyes and said, "The floor is yours." It was a long time ago, Clark. Daniel and I haven't slept together in about 20 years. Can't we just leave it as a distant past mistake and move on? I was relieved she didn't try to claim the DNA test was wrong, but her attempt to brush it off as ancient history. That was hard to swallow. All right, the last time was 20 years ago. But when did it start? How frequently did it happen? And why did it stop? I need to know everything. And first, are both our children biologically mine? No, Clark. Matthew and Inna are yours. I didn't sleep with Daniel until about a year after Inna was born. The affair lasted for about 3 years initially, but we stopped when Daniel decided to leave the firm and pursue his judicial career. He waited a year after we ended things to go for his first judge position, to ensure his background check would be clean. After that, we only made love a few times at the lake house, whenever Bella took the kids out for an afternoon. Bella was unaware at the time, but eventually Daniel told her, and the three of us had a calm discussion where Daniel and I promised there would be no more infidelity. Why didn't you ever tell me or try to make peace with me? What am I, chopped liver? I demanded harshly. Haley wiped her hands on her sleeves and replied, I knew I could never tell you. You divorced me in a heartbeat, and I couldn't bear that. I loved you. I still love you. Apparently, you love Daniel more, I retorted. To follow his lead without a second thought for me, I was just your fallback. No, Clark, I truly love you with all my heart, she pleaded. No, you loved him with all your heart. You gave him up so he could chase his career dreams, knowing I was your backup plan. Maybe you loved me a little then, but you fully knew I adored you and counted on that and our family to get over losing him. Haley lowered her eyes to her lap. The painful truth hung heavy in the air, and I could see she knew I was right. And what about Mia? You knew not using protection could have consequences, and it did. I thought that with both of you having brown hair, brown eyes, and light skin, no one would suspect whose child she was. When she came out looking like me, I figured there was no reason for concern, until you sent her that DNA test. I honestly had no idea before then. So, this is my fault? I asked incredulously. No. Daniel and I talked about the possibility, but I assured him he didn't need to worry since you and he share similar physical traits. As far as I knew, he was still unaware, but I'm sure Lily has informed him by now. I haven't had any contact with him for at least a couple of years, ever since Mia's wedding to Joseph 2 years ago. Well, regardless of what anyone knows, Mia is still mine in my eyes, and that's what I told her. I'm listed on the birth certificate. I raised her. I love her. She's mine. Daniel better not get any ideas, and if he calls, you better set him straight. And by the way, I'm having DNA tests done on the other 2 kids as soon as possible. I need to know for my own peace of mind. Clark, Haley hissed. I already told you they are yours. And why should I trust you? I snapped back. Haley was visibly shocked by my sudden lack of trust. What did she expect? It also clearly distressed her that I'd have to explain her infidelity to the other 2 children. No one wants their own kids to see them as unfaithful. So, how often were you 2 together, and where? Finish the story for me, I demanded. We didn't plan this, Clark. It just happened. We spent so much time working together, then became friends, and it developed from there. He was kind, considerate, witty, funny, passionate. You know the man, and we connected deeply. But because we both loved our spouses, we kept it minimal and usually met outside the city. No, we never met here or at his home. That would have been wrong on many levels. But that didn't stop you two from hooking up a few times at the lake house after the supposed end of the affair, while Guinea was out with the kids, I said aloud, pondering. No, it didn't, she whispered, but I swear we haven't been intimate since then. And Bella knows all of this and has forgiven both of you, I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. Yes, I told you. I don't think I can, I exclaimed, my voice raw with emotion. Clark, we know what we did was wrong, but it ended over 20 years ago. You were never hurt by it at the time, so can't we just return to how things were a few weeks ago? You were my loving husband, and I was your loving wife. Nothing has to change. But it already has changed, Haley, I replied. I've spent the last 3 weeks questioning what I did wrong for you to fall for someone else, and doubting if I could ever fully trust you again, let alone continue our marriage. I gave you my entire heart, but you treated it like an occasional accessory. This wasn't supposed to be a marriage of convenience. It was meant to be an all-consuming, unconditional love. Haley started to cry. Normally, I would comfort her, but this time, I felt different. I moved to the family room and turned on the TV, leaving her at the kitchen table. That night, we shared the same bed, but for the first time in ages, we didn't cuddle. I kept as much distance as the queen-size bed allowed and stopped her from moving closer when she tried. Her face reflected shock and pain, but I remained indifferent. The next morning, Haley made a nice breakfast. As we ate, I brought up the subject of divorce. The affair was over 20 years ago. You didn't even know about it then. It's in the past. Let's just move on, she nearly screamed. Wrong is still wrong, no matter how long ago it happened, I yelled back. You deceived me, lied to me, cheated on me, and shattered my trust. Those are not issues that expire with time. I got up from the table, leaving half my plate untouched, and went outside to mow the lawn. That would be the last time I spoke to Haley until dinner on Wednesday, when she informed me that Bella Torres would be joining us for the upcoming weekend. I wasn't thrilled about it, but Bella and I share a deep history and a common experience of betrayal, so I felt I owed her a conversation. Bella arrived at 6 p.m. on Friday after a 2-hour drive from her place, but she didn't bring Daniel with her. Haley had prepared stuffed flank steak with mashed potatoes, and I had picked up a few bottles of Merlot to complement the meal. Our dinner conversation was light and amiable, and afterward, we moved to the family room with our wine glasses in hand, anticipating a more serious discussion. Bella began recounting the affair as if it were a detached history lesson, calm and clinical. However, as she delved deeper, her emotions surfaced, and both she and Haley's eyes welled up with tears. When Daniel confessed about the affair, it had already ended a couple of years prior, and he assured me it would never happen again, Bella said, her voice trembling. I was devastated at first, but as I processed it, I realized that since it was already over when I found out, it didn't hurt as much. Knowing that Haley wasn't after money made it somewhat understandable. Daniel has a magnetic personality, doesn't he? I only learned about Mia a few weeks ago, along with everyone else. I'm really sorry about that, Clark. Bella never mentioned the few times Haley and Daniel met up at the Torres' lake house after the main affair had ended. I wondered if they had even disclosed that to her. I chose not to bring it up. It amazed me that Daniel, a skilled lawyer, had managed to evoke an almost apologetic tone from Bella regarding his infidelity. Unfortunately for Haley, my response was far from Bella's. I wasn't swayed by her calm demeanor or her words, and I wasn't ready to forgive Haley and Daniel as easily, even if the affair had ended 2 decades ago. I often wonder how my life would have turned out if I had left him. Things would be so different for me and the girls, she shared thoughtfully. People always say to consider if your life would be better or worse without your spouse, and I know mine would have been worse. Thanks for sharing that, Bella. It's definitely something to think about. I have a lot to consider, though, especially since, unlike you, I wasn't told about the affair. I found out completely by accident. Haley knew she was making a mistake when she did it and anticipated my reaction. She thought it best if I remained in the dark and continued living in blissful ignorance. And that's what my life would have been like if it weren't for that test. Now, 20 years later, I discover that my wife had loved another man and was intimate with him, then chose to be with me more out of obligation than love. Is that right, Haley? Haley had remained silent while Bella spoke, sitting calmly but stealing glances at me, gauging my reaction. Aware of her eyes on me, I maintained a neutral expression, just to unsettle her a bit. Neither Haley nor Bella was pleased with my response to Bella's story. They exchanged pained looks while I shook my head, went into the kitchen to pour another glass of wine, and returned to switch on the big screen in the family room, signaling that I was done for the night. The women took the hint and moved to the living room, where I could hear their soft murmurs. After my show ended, I turned off the TV, popped my head into the living room to say goodnight, and headed upstairs to our bedroom. On Saturday, Bella cornered me alone in the family room and insisted we talk. Unaware of Haley's whereabouts, I agreed, and we moved to the formal living room, settling into 2 chairs in a corner. Clark, I truly understand your pain. Not forgiving Haley and deciding to divorce her would be a grave mistake for both of you, Bella began, her voice soft. You love her, and she loves you. That should be the heart of it. The past is behind you, and letting it dictate your future would be a tragedy for the both of you. If I can forgive Daniel, surely you can find it in your heart to forgive Haley. I honestly don't know if I can, Bella. As I mentioned yesterday, I wasn't told about the affair. You were. She didn't tell me because she knew it was wrong, and I wouldn't have forgiven her back then. Why should I now? She deceived me for 2 decades, hiding her affair all this time. How can I ever trust her again, let alone forgive her? I shook my head and left the room, walking past Haley, who stood in the hallway, her eyes full of apprehension. She knew what Bella and I had discussed. My expression alone told her I wasn't changing my stance. Dinner that Saturday night was a silent affair. The women attempted small talk, but I wasn't interested. I barely spoke 3 words throughout the entire meal. After a quick thank you, I grabbed my jacket and headed out, telling them I'd be at Malone's, my preferred spot for a quiet drink. Arriving at Malone's, I noticed Jane, the bar owner, chatting with some customers in a far corner. Instead of my usual seat at the bar, I chose a solitary table, feeling wretched and apparently looking even worse. Mary, the bartender, brought my usual Crown Black on ice and remarked how I seemed like I'd just lost my dog. Not my dog, just my marriage, I replied with a bitter chuckle. Mary then whispered something to Jane, who promptly made her way over to me, excusing herself from the other customers. She sat down across from me. All right, Superman, spill, she said. Jane was around my age, a robust woman of Irish descent with a mane of red hair and a freckled face she wore proudly. She was tough as nails, but just in case anyone decided to challenge her, her husband Jake was cooking in the back. A towering figure at 6'3" and 280 pounds, he was a former Marine drill sergeant. Malone's was generally a peaceful place, but bars can sometimes get rowdy. I remembered one incident where a guy mouthed off to Jane. When she pushed back, he didn't back down. Jake took him out with a single punch and pinned him to the floor until the cops arrived. Jane always called me Superman because my name reminded her of Clark Kent. She used to tell everyone that while I was a nice guy with a good job, they wouldn't want to see me angry. We had a lot of laughs over that. I had been coming into Malone's for 20 years, sometimes with Haley, sometimes alone, sometimes to eat, and sometimes just for a drink. Jane and Jake got to know both Haley and me very well. Jane could read people, me included, like an open book. She was like the sister I never had. Haley and I are done, I blurted out finally. I hadn't told anyone before, and it felt like a weight was lifted off my chest. I found out she cheated on me with her boss about 20 years ago. Not just once, not just several times, but for 4 years. And my youngest, Mia, turns out she's his. And Haley thinks that because it happened so long ago, and I didn't know about it at the time, I should just accept it and move on. She says she loves me, always has, and doesn't want a divorce. That cheating bitch, Jane exclaimed. How dare she? You're not just going to let her stay, are you? If Jake did that to me, he'd be up on the wall, and the guy she cheated with would have his skin tacked up right next to his. It felt good to know Jane agreed. Her common sense, no-nonsense perspective always mattered to me, and if she had thought otherwise, I might have reconsidered my position. Listen, Superman, it's as much about respect as anything. I loved Haley too, but her deceit wasn't out of love or respect. How could she let you believe another man's child was yours all these years? I filled Jane in on the details about Mia, knowing that Haley claimed she wasn't entirely sure. Jane didn't buy it for a second, pointing out that not getting a paternity test was just a convenient way to avoid the truth. Has she ever apologized for the affair or just for hurting you? Damn. Jane hit the nail on the head. She's never apologized for the affair. I don't think she's even really apologized for hurting me. The only thing she seems sorry for is that I found out, I admitted. I can't tell you what to do, Superman, but I think it's clear what needs to be done. I'm sorry, Clark. The crown is on me and Jake tonight. The rest of the bottle is yours, and we'll call you a cab when you're ready to go. Hand me your keys. I handed her my keys without hesitation. The cab driver practically carried me into my house around 2 a.m. Haley met us at the door and helped guide me to our bedroom. I collapsed on the bed fully clothed. Haley took off my shoes and socks, and there I slept, just like that. Late Wednesday afternoon, I received a call from my son at the office. He wanted to discuss the situation with Haley. Though he didn't explicitly say it, it was clear that Haley had enlisted the help of the kids to persuade me against the divorce. Typically, my son and I see eye to eye, but I could tell she had influenced him significantly. He was definitely siding with her on this matter. Dad, divorcing Mom would be the stupidest thing you've done since you wore a leisure suit in the 70s. He attempted a light-hearted approach. Seriously, Dad, for something she did 20 years ago, which you only found out a few weeks back. This is the woman you said you loved and wanted to spend the rest of your life with just a few weeks ago. Now you're prepared to throw it all away and possibly live the rest of your life alone over a mistake. Seriously, Dad. First of all, Matthew, a mistake would have been what she did the first few times she slept with him. After a few months, it's a decision, not a mistake. And what would you do if you found out Linda was cheating on you? You probably lose it. But you didn't catch her. It's been over for 20 years, he countered. The physical act has been over. The deception and lack of respect have continued, I responded coolly. Matthew, I thought you were wise enough to stay out of this and not choose sides. Yet you've decided to step in where no child should, between their parents. And for what, Matthew? I'm not going to change my mind. I'm the injured party here, and you're just aggravating me. I placed that woman on a pedestal. I worshipped the ground she walked on, and she knew it. She never intended to tell me the truth, and if it wasn't for an accident, I would have gone to my grave worshipping her, while she merely saw me as a second choice because the man she truly loved wouldn't marry her. Do I feel used? Absolutely. Dad, don't you think you're overreacting a bit? I asked as I ended the call while he was still talking. When I walked in around 6 p.m., Haley was just about finished preparing what smelled like a delicious meal. Despite her efforts, I told her I wasn't hungry, poured myself a glass of Jack, turned on the TV, and settled into my favorite recliner. Noticing her unhappy expression, she eventually came in and asked me what was wrong. Same crap, different day, I replied. My wife cheats on me for 4 years, has a kid with another guy, and now my children are painting me as the villain. Do me a favor, call Inna tonight and tell her not to bother calling me tomorrow unless she wants to be hung up on like Matthew. Haley lowered her gaze. After 31 years together, you'd think she'd know better than to have others upset me on her behalf. What on earth makes you think this divorce isn't inevitable? I demanded, raising my voice. Not only did you cheat on me for 4 years and have his child, but you also replaced me in your heart with him. Can you honestly say you weren't in love with him, and that you wouldn't have left me if he had asked you to divorce and marry him? The truth is, you might love me, but you're not in love with me. You love him. I've been your safety net, someone you always knew would be there because you owned my heart, and I'd do anything for you as long as I thought you were mine. You cheated, deceived, and disrespected me, and now you have the nerve to turn our kids against me. That was the final straw. Trace. But no, I won't be cruel. I'm not going to ruin Bella's life or Daniel's pristine career as a judge. I'll file for irreconcilable differences, and we can each keep our retirement accounts, splitting the house and everything else down the middle. Haley's tears flowed rapidly as she got up from her chair. Before she left the room, I added one more thing. You've never apologized for cheating. Probably because you're not actually sorry. The only thing you're sorry about is that I found out, isn't it? I spent the rest of the night with my bottle of Jack, seeking its familiar comfort. The following day, I contacted my attorney and asked her to expedite the preparation of the divorce papers. She informed me that I could review them the next Tuesday, they would be ready by Wednesday, and Haley could be served by Thursday. I requested that her server come to my house on Friday evening, as I wanted to be present when Haley was served. Next, I reached out to Judge Daniel Torres' office, requesting his admin to ask him to return my call regarding a significant matter. Judge Torres was aware of the reason behind my call, and I was confident he would get back to me promptly. About 2 hours later, Daniel, sounding a bit anxious, returned my call, understanding the urgency. He preferred not to handle the issue at his office, which I agreed with. We arranged to meet at his house with Bella on the following Saturday at 10 a.m. He was unaware that Haley wouldn't be served the previous night, but he would likely realize it during my 2-hour drive to his luxurious home. During dinner at Malone's on Saturday night, Haley admitted that Bella had informed her about my meeting with Daniel the next Saturday. She asked if she could accompany me on the drive. "This isn't a social visit, Haley," I replied. "Daniel and I have things to discuss, and you don't need to be there." You should remember that Daniel is an appellate court judge with an excellent reputation. He might even be on a short list for Supreme Court justice. Doing something reckless could get you arrested, and you promised not to harm his career. Right, you're choosing him over me again. But don't worry, I'll keep my promise. I won't do anything that might jeopardize his Supreme Court prospects. The show must go on. After updating the old man at the office about my personal situation, I took a couple of hours to meet with my lawyer and review the divorce papers, giving her the green light to proceed. She inquired about my plans concerning Judge Daniel as I was leaving. "Why do you ask?" I said with a wink. "Because I still handle criminal cases and have a feeling you might need a good attorney. Engineers like yourself rarely get emotional, but your methodical approach is somewhat concerning." She handed me her card, and I left the office. The next 3 days flew by, thanks to a significant project at work that demanded my full attention. The old man was impressed by my focus despite the personal turmoil. Before leaving on Friday night, I informed him about Haley being served and my upcoming confrontation with Daniel, warning him I might end up in jail by Monday. He reassured me that he had my back and my bail money. We parted with a handshake. I returned home to the enticing aroma of yet another exquisite meal being prepared by Haley. Lately, she had been going above and beyond, showcasing her culinary talents in an effort to capture my attention. There was no denying she was a fantastic cook. I almost felt a pang of guilt because I knew what awaited us after dinner. Our meal was mostly consumed in silence, as had become our norm over the past few weeks. Nonetheless, I made a point to compliment her cooking. I wasn't an ungrateful jerk, after all. After dinner, I helped her clear the dishes. Just as we were about to settle into the family room for our usual television routine, the doorbell rang. It was exactly 7 o'clock. I knew the visitor wasn't there for me, so I didn't make a move to answer. Haley shot me a curious glance before heading to the door. Standing on the porch was a well-dressed young man who asked if she was Haley Miller. Upon her confirmation, he handed her a manila envelope, declared, "You have been served," and promptly left. Haley stood frozen in place, and I could see her shoulders trembling with silent tears. Gently, I walked past her, closed the front door, and guided her back to the kitchen table. Despite my prior warnings, she looked utterly devastated. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, but was likely just a few minutes. Eventually, she whispered, "You bastard," before fleeing upstairs to her bedroom. I didn't follow her. The hardest part was over. That night, for one of the few times since our marriage, I didn't sleep in the same bed as Haley. Instead, I retreated to the guest room, though calling it sleep was a stretch. I had made the final break from the woman who, until a few weeks ago, had been the light of my life, my soulmate, my everything. Despite everything that had transpired, we had still shared the same bed, perhaps neither of us wanting to be the one to disrupt that last semblance of normalcy. But now in my mind, it was truly over. I got up, took a shower, and quietly slipped into the bedroom to gather my clothes, careful not to wake Haley and risk starting something. Without checking if she was awake, I grabbed my things and left. I opted for a casual look, a collared shirt, a decent pair of Levi's, and my custom metal-tipped cowboy boots, which I had made when visiting our son in Dallas. I left earlier than necessary to avoid being late for the meeting. If I arrived too soon, I could always pass the time at a coffee shop, which is exactly what I ended up doing. Promptly at 10, I stood on Daniel and Bella's porch and rang the bell. Bella, looking as beautiful as ever but clearly nervous, opened the door. "I'm sorry it has to end like this," I murmured as she leaned in for a hug. She didn't respond, just took my hand and led me to the den, where Daniel's mementos and photos were displayed. Daniel was sitting in his favorite recliner, but stood up as we entered. "Hello, Clark." "Hello, Daniel." Bella, now appearing downright scared, quietly exited the room. We stood about 6 feet apart, gazing at each other. Once, Daniel had been like an older brother to me. We were that close. He was 2 years older and about the same size, though 20 years of a comfortable lifestyle had added around 30 pounds to his frame, much of it in his round belly. We had shared dreams and hopes, celebrated together, and fished and hunted side by side. I was proud to call him my friend and admired his rise in the judicial world. But now, standing before me, assessing me with his eyes, he was no longer a friend but foe, the man who had stolen my wife's love, impregnated her, and destroyed my life. Rage surged through me. "You'll win my wife's heart, you bastard," I shouted, "and you get to keep your spotless reputation because I promised Haley I'd never tell anyone about this, and I keep my promises to her, but you're not keeping your balls." With a sudden burst of anger, I took a quick step forward with my left foot, then planted my right, and drove it forward and upward like kicking for a 50-yard field goal, his testicles the target. Daniel reacted even slower than I had anticipated. My metal-tipped boot struck accurately and forcefully. He let out an animalistic yelp and collapsed, clutching himself and squealing like a hunted pig. Bella rushed into the room, saw her husband writhing on the floor, and hurried to his side. He continued to scream in agony, beyond any comfort she could offer. She looked at me, distraught. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed 911. "There's been an accident at Judge Daniel Torres' house," I reported. "We need an ambulance at this location." I spun around and headed for the door, but just before I reached it, Bella caught my right arm. Bracing myself for a potential outburst, I was surprised to see a calm expression on her face. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you. We know what we have to do." I returned her embrace, stepped out of the house, got into my car, and drove home, comforted by the certainty that the cops wouldn't be coming for me. Bella understood completely and would explain it to her husband when he could think more clearly. The drive home felt liberating, perhaps even more than the swift kick I delivered. After months of having my heart shattered daily, I finally felt free. It was strange, but once I accepted Haley's betrayal, her hold on my heart weakened. I could finally think clearly enough to do what was best for me. It might not have been the ideal solution for everyone involved, but sometimes you have to prioritize your own well-being. After all, that's what others had done for the past 20 years, so why shouldn't I start now? Although a part of me would always love Haley, I wasn't going to dwell on the affair anymore. It was neither my doing nor my choice. It was time to move forward. When I got home, I went down to the basement, grabbed a couple of suitcases, and headed up to our bedroom. Haley, sitting in the family room, followed me upstairs. "So this is it then?" she asked. Just like that. 31 years and out the door. "Haley, I'm sorry that you're so absorbed in yourself that you can't see how you wronged me. How you stole 24 years of my love with your deceit. You can't see it, and probably never will. But I've made peace with it, and I don't hate you. I don't even hate Daniel, though right now the poor guy probably thinks so. I'll make my peace with Matthew and Inna sometime in the future. You might consider making your peace with Mia as soon as possible. The poor girl's a mess. Sign the paperwork, Haley, and let's get this done. I'll get the rest of my stuff out of here in the next few days. I don't think we need to talk anymore. If you have anything else to say, I've put my lawyer's card on the kitchen table. She stood there in shock, tears in her eyes, but unable to speak. I picked up my suitcases, went downstairs, and loaded them into my car. I went back inside, grabbed a few more belongings, and left. 31 years, just like that. Epilogue. I was wrong. Daniel managed to save one of his treasures after all. It required extensive surgery and months of rehabilitation, but they were able to salvage one of his jewels. I learned about it from Mia, who was contacted by Bella trying to reach me. Bella didn't have my phone number, and the rest of the family refused to inform me. In fact, none of them have spoken to me in the 8 months since it happened, but I've come to terms with it. The official story is that Judge Daniel fell heavily against the corner of his ornate desk in his den, injuring himself severely, and then made it worse when he hit the floor. The press called it a home accident to keep it discreet and didn't mention it was a genital injury. He received a lot of sympathetic media coverage, which likely won't hurt his chances for a spot on the Supreme Court shortlist. Haley signed the divorce papers within a week, and it was finalized last week. The house is set to be auctioned off. Haley hasn't reached out to me since I left, nor have Matthew and Inna. It looks like I won't be getting an invitation to the family Christmas dinner, wherever it ends up being. Starting from the new year, the old man will be handing over control of the company to me as he retires. The deal is that I have to run it for 7 years before I can retire with a substantial golden parachute. He plans to sell the company by then, and I'll receive 10% of that transaction as well. I've begun to venture out socially, essentially dating again. After being married for so long, I'm slowly relearning the ropes. Word about the divorce spread quickly, and a few divorced friends have reached out to gauge my interest. Surprisingly, 2 or 3 of Haley's divorced friends also called, expressing shock that she let me go. I have to admit, that was a nice boost to my ego. I have a promising future ahead, filled with both professional and personal challenges. I've been exploring new hobbies with the extra free time I now have. However, one hobby I've decided to drop for good is genealogy. I've been down that road already. The third story. I informed my wife, Polly, that my seminar had wrapped up ahead of schedule, yet regrettably, I couldn't rearrange my flight plans. Consequently, I would still be returning home on Tuesday evening, necessitating her to pick me up from the airport around 6. Despite her initial complaint about another night apart, she assured me she'd be all the happier to see me. Her words lingered in my mind for quite some time. Reflecting on my frequent absences, I realized the importance of prioritizing my relationship with my wife of 17 years. With newfound determination, I ventured to the airport and explored the possibility of standby options. Initially uncertain, I stumbled upon a flight bound for an airport closer to home, the one I had never utilized before, situated nearly 2 hours south of our residence. Taking a chance, I discovered a flight departing for this alternative airport in just half an hour. With little hesitation, I approached the ticket desk, surprised by the simplicity of securing a seat. An hour later, I found myself airborne, mere hours away from touching down. With the prospect of renting a car and arriving home by midnight, I envisioned Polly's delighted reaction to my unexpected early return. Amused by the thought, I mentally drafted a list of ways she might express her joy, deciding to withhold my plans from her and make my arrival a delightful surprise. As the clock ticked just shy of midnight, I maneuvered my car into the driveway, greeted by the darkness of the house and the absence of Polly's car. Puzzled, I carried my bag inside, contemplating her whereabouts at such a late hour. Setting aside my plans for a surprise, I dialed her cell phone, my curiosity piqued. After a few rings, Polly answered, her voice heavy with sleepiness. "Hey, Paul. Just thought I'd check in," I fibbed, trying to gauge her reaction. "Everything's fine, Nate, but it's late." I was asleep, she replied, her words tinged with weariness. I'll be at the airport to pick you up at 6 tomorrow. Don't worry. Her response only deepened my confusion. Where could she possibly be sleeping if not at home? Where are you then? I tried calling the landline, but got the machine I pressed, unable to shake off my suspicion. Why, in bed, of course. Our phone's acting up. I've got someone coming over tomorrow to fix it. Seems like it's not just us, she explained, her voice trailing off with a yawn. Just use my cell if you need me. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she truly in bed upstairs? The scenario seemed implausible, fueling my growing suspicion that she wasn't being entirely honest with me. But why? Well, looks like I won't be on that flight tomorrow. Plans have changed, so don't bother coming to the airport, I informed her, masking my uncertainty. I'll keep you posted once I've sorted out the details of my return. Oh, sweetie, I'll miss you. Hurry home, she exclaimed, her voice brimming with affection. I can't wait to see you. I'll be in touch, darling. Sorry for waking you up. Sweet dreams, I replied, concluding our conversation. I will, she assured me, and as she hung up, did I catch a hint of laughter in her voice. Dialing our home phone, it rang without issue. Tempted momentarily to stage a conversation with myself, I dismissed the idea and instead embarked on a search throughout the house, checking under the bed and every conceivable hiding spot. Alas, E had vacated the premises. Though I'm in sales, not rocket science, my instincts kicked in, detecting something amiss. Admitting my own folly, I resolved to take action. Rising early the following morning, I discreetly relocated the rental car across the street. Around 7 a.m., Polly's car pulled into the driveway, accompanied by a male passenger. Ducking into a nearby closet, I left the door slightly ajar, eavesdropping on their exchange. Just need to change and head to work, Polly informed her companion. I'll grab some clothes for tomorrow to save us a trip back in the morning. Be back in 10. I'd lend a hand, but then I'd be responsible for getting you back into bed, he chuckled, and then I'd have to fire you for being late. I doubt you'd have the heart to fire me. Polly's voice drifted down from upstairs. You seem to enjoy having me under you too much. Even your wife thinks I'm the perfect secretary. What would you say to her? So, this was Polly's new boss. The one she described as obnoxious and arrogant. I couldn't help but wonder what she saw in him, given her initial impression. He'd only been with the company for a couple of weeks, if memory served me right. Clearly, he was a fast mover. I told her you were the same age as her mother and weighed 220 pounds. Her boss chuckled. When she sees you, I might have to let you go anyway. And I mentioned I was house hunting this week. Looks like I won't be straying too far from the hotel for a couple of days. Polly rejoined the conversation, looking stunning as ever, and Mr. Boss, was his name Johnny, pulled her close, planting a slow, wet kiss on her lips. My blood boiled with a mix of jealousy and rage. I fought the urge to grab an umbrella and shove it where the sun doesn't shine. Why don't you plan on spending tomorrow night with me here? We'll go to dinner and be back by 8 p.m. Who knows, you might get lucky, and after you're done with the owner, we can explore every room, Polly suggested with a playful grin. Interested in that tour? What if hubby comes home early? Inquired the boss. Josh, you're such a nervous wreck, she chuckled, confirming his name. Nat will call to arrange the airport pickup. He always gives me a day's notice, so if he doesn't call today, he won't be coming home tomorrow. Fair enough, Josh agreed. I don't need some jealous husband coming after me. Nat's harmless, Polly reassured him. He'd probably offer you a beer and apologize to me for driving me into your arms. Sounds like a pushover to me. My wife would have my head, Josh remarked. And I'd have Nat's if he ever cheated on me. Fear keeps you men in line, Polly remarked, adding, most of the time. You don't seem too scared of your wife. Trust me, I'd be in big trouble, Josh replied. I'd be lucky to come out of it alive, let alone with my dignity. Luckily, she's in Houston, so I feel pretty safe. Their voices trailed off as they left the house. My face flushed red, and my blood pressure soared. Not only had she been unfaithful, but my wife also held me in contempt. I sank into a chair, contemplating my predicament. Slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. I recalled Polly mentioning that her new boss had been transferred from the company headquarters in Houston. Determined to uncover his identity, I made a few discreet phone calls. With a bit of artful probing directed at a receptionist at Polly's workplace, I swiftly obtained the necessary details. His name was Joshua Perry, and he was married with 2 teenage children. His family was remaining in Texas until the end of the school year, after which they would join him in Springfield. Apparently, he spent his evenings searching for a suitable house. Utilizing an online directory, I located 3 individuals named Josh Perry in Houston. Fortunately, my first call hit the jackpot. "Mrs. Perry? Mrs. Joshua Perry?" I inquired. "Yes, this is Mrs. Joshua Perry. How can I assist you?" she responded. "Does your husband work for Halifax Company?" I inquired further. "Yes, he does," she confirmed. "This is Mr. Grant Green from Halifax Company," I fibbed. "We're organizing a surprise welcome party for your husband, Josh, and yourself. We'll provide round-trip tickets to Springfield and back. It's all a surprise for Josh. Can you make it?" Feeling a pang of guilt for my deceit, I reminded myself that all's fair in love and war, and at that moment, I was certainly at war. "I could arrange for my sister to watch the children," she replied. "It sounds lovely. When is the event?" I nearly gave a sarcastic retort to her question, but managed to restrain myself. "Tomorrow evening it is. You'll need to catch flight 1435 on American. Just charge it to your card, and the company will reimburse Josh through his paycheck," I informed her. "We'll have someone at the airport to pick you up. The flight arrives at 5 p.m., and the party starts at 8, so there should be plenty of time. And remember, keep this under wraps, all right?" She assured me of her discretion, and I concluded the conversation. Next, I reached out to a few of Polly's friends and relatives, extending invitations to a surprise party for her. I explained that she was receiving a raise from her boss, and I felt it was a cause for celebration. Everyone seemed content with that explanation and agreed to keep it hush-hush for Polly. I instructed them to arrive at our home by 7 to ensure they were there when Polly arrived. Not wanting to be an inconsiderate host, I contacted a local caterer and placed an order for food and drinks for the following evening. I specified that everything should be set up on the deck off the living room by our pool. I couldn't help but think how much Polly had always wanted to host a nice party on that deck. This would surely delight her. Leaving detailed instructions, I informed them that the house might be empty upon their arrival, but they could access everything around the side of the house. The following day, I arrived at the airport a good half hour early. As passengers began to filter into the luggage area, I mustered the courage to approach a couple of unaccompanied women, inquiring if they were Mrs. Perry. Just as I was addressing one lady, a voice called out to me. "Hello, I'm Mrs. Perry," she declared. "Are you here to pick me up?" I was almost dumbstruck when I laid eyes on her. She possessed the allure of a Hollywood starlet. It took me a moment to gather my thoughts before I could respond. While my wife was undeniably attractive, this woman set a new standard of beauty. "I'm Nathan, and yes, I'm here to pick you up. My wife works with your husband," I explained. "Has he ever mentioned Polly?" "Oh yes, he has, but I imagined her husband to be a bit older," she remarked. Damn. That jerk had indeed painted Polly as an older woman to his wife. I had to think on my feet. She seemed somewhat skeptical. "I get that misconception a lot for marrying an older, more robust woman. I always say she just has more experience, and there's more of her to love," I offered, hoping to smooth over the situation. She seemed to mull it over before finally smiling. I'd managed to sidestep that potential disaster. Collecting her bags, we made our way to the parking lot. By the time we reached my place at 6:30, I was explaining to Mrs. Perry that it was an outdoor party for her husband, as well as a birthday celebration for my wife, as guests began to arrive. The caterer meticulously finished setting up, and I was thoroughly impressed. It resembled a top-notch affair, something I hadn't realized could be accomplished so effortlessly. By 7:30, all the guests I'd invited had arrived. I had instructed them to park behind a nearby church, ensuring our driveway remained clear. Gathering everyone together, I outlined the plan. I would hide in the living room, and when the guests of honor pulled into the driveway, I'd switch off the deck lights. This would signal for everyone to hush. Our sliding glass doors opened onto the deck, with vertical blinds easily manipulated by pulling a cord. There was also a separate cord to draw the blinds away from the door. In addition, we had heavier drapes that we typically use during colder weather, large enough for me to conceal myself behind. From there, I could reach both the cords for the blinds and the switch for the deck lights. A few minutes before 8, I spotted Polly's car pulling into the driveway. Quickly, I switched off the deck lights and retreated behind the drapes, the room falling into a tense silence. Their passion ignited immediately. When their fervor subsided, I emerged from the shadows. "What are you doing here?" Polly demanded, her tone sharp. I couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment at her mundane question. Perhaps the surprise had dulled her senses. "This is my home, Polly. My name is on the deed," I replied evenly. "I didn't expect you to be home for a few days," she exclaimed. "That much is evident," I responded casually. "I should probably get going," Josh interjected abruptly. "I have some things to take care of." "Can I offer you a beer or anything?" I offered, breaking the tension. Both Josh and Polly seemed taken aback by my gesture. I could almost see the gears turning in Josh's mind as he reconsidered Polly's assessment of me, offering him a beer. A small smile crept onto my face as I observed his internal deliberation. There was barely a moment for Josh to respond before his wife barged into the room from the deck, her fury palpable. Gripping her large purse tightly, she swung it with all her might, catching Josh completely off guard. He stood frozen, unable to defend himself, and I watched as he was propelled about 5 feet from where he had been standing. Following her, Polly's mother and sister entered the room, greeted by the sight of Polly still unclothed. "Put some clothes on, Polly, you disgrace," her mother spat, thrusting Polly's dress towards her. "And wipe that smirk off your face, sis," Polly's sister Sally chimed in. "That performance you just gave, you could consider a career in adult entertainment." Polly was left speechless, her shock evident. With a flick of the switch, I illuminated the deck lights, revealing another 20 pairs of eyes peering in. I ventured outside, grabbing a plate of potato salad and wings before returning indoors with a can of beer. Settling into a chair, I observed Josh struggling to sit up and Polly attempting to find her voice. It was undeniably a chaotic scene. As I chewed on a wing, I couldn't help but acknowledge that while I hadn't orchestrated this mess, Polly and Josh had brought it upon themselves, dragging their loved ones into the turmoil. In the grand scheme of things, discovering the truth and moving forward was ultimately for the best. Eventually, the chaos subsided. One of Polly's cousins escorted Mrs. Perry to a nearby motel, while another cousin aided Josh to his car and drove him to his own lodging. Polly's mother offered to take her home, but Polly declined. "I know you must be upset," Polly's mother addressed me, "and Polly really deserves a good scolding, but I believe she's already suffering." With those words, they departed, leaving Polly and me alone. She disappeared into the bathroom, and soon the sound of the shower filled the silence. Left to my own devices, I savored the taste of beer and wings, reflecting on the evening's tumultuous events. Rarely in life did plans align so perfectly and yield such results. After devouring all the salad and wings I could manage, I set about tidying up the aftermath of the gathering. Wrapping up leftovers and storing them in the fridge and freezer consumed quite some time. By the time I settled down with my final beer of the night, it was already midnight, and a sense of tranquility washed over me. Polly entered the room and took a seat opposite me. "I hope you're satisfied. You've done everything in your power to ruin my life tonight," she lamented. "Even my own family now views me as some worthless woman. Is that what you wanted?" "Polly, why would they think that? Have I done anything to warrant such a perception? Have you?" I countered. "The only reason for anyone to believe that is when your boss crosses the line. Would any rational person consider that the behavior of a worthless woman? If you thought there was an issue between us, you could have come to me instead of throwing a damn neighborhood gathering," she hissed, her voice edged with anger. "We have a problem," I chuckled incredulously. So you're saying if there were an issue, you'd talk to me before seeking solace with some stranger? I never intended to hurt you, Nat. I never imagined you'd find out, Polly reasoned, her tone softer now. You hurt me deliberately. So hosting a surprise party for my beloved wife at our home is worse than betraying our marriage vows. I questioned. I doubt many people would agree with that. Then she voiced the words I'd been waiting to hear. If you had been more present, this wouldn't have happened, Polly reasoned. You weren't giving me enough attention, so I fell for Josh's charm. I felt alone and vulnerable. I couldn't help but laugh, filled with a sense of irony. She was attempting to shift the blame onto me, expecting an apology for her infidelity. As I closed the bedroom door behind me and locked it, a wave of relief washed over me. The chains of emotional entrapment were finally broken. I was free, both emotionally and soon legally. A new chapter awaited, and I welcomed it with open arms. Epilogue. The days following the revelation of Polly's infidelity were a whirlwind of emotions for Nathan. As he processed the betrayal, he found a strange sense of liberation mingling with the pain. The confrontation with Polly and the subsequent fallout from their friends and family had torn away the facade of their marriage, revealing cracks Nathan had been blind to for too long. In the weeks that followed, Nathan filed for divorce. The process was neither easy nor pleasant, but with each legal document signed, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He moved out of their shared home, opting for a small apartment downtown. It was modest, but it was his, free from the memories of a marriage tainted by lies and deceit. At first, the solitude was daunting. Nathan had grown accustomed to the presence of another person in his life, even if that person had betrayed him. But as the days passed, he found solace in the quiet, in the freedom to rediscover himself without the expectations and demands of a failing relationship. He threw himself into his work, channeling his energy into his sales career with renewed vigor. Without the distractions of a crumbling marriage, he found success he hadn't known possible. His colleagues noticed the change in him, remarking on his newfound confidence and determination. But amidst the chaos of rebuilding his life, Nathan found unexpected moments of joy. He reconnected with old friends, spent weekends exploring new hobbies, and savored the simple pleasure of solitude. He rediscovered the person he had been before Polly, the person he had lost sight of in the tumult of their marriage. As the months passed, Nathan emerged from the ashes of his failed marriage stronger and more resilient than ever. He no longer defined himself by the actions of his ex-wife, nor did he harbor resentment towards her. Instead, he chose to focus on his own growth and happiness, knowing that he was better off without the toxicity of their relationship. And in the quiet moments of reflection, Nathan found gratitude for the experience. It had been a painful journey, but it had led him to a place of self-discovery and authenticity. He was no longer shackled by the expectations of others or weighed down by the burden of a failed marriage. He was free to live life on his own terms, unencumbered by the past. As he stood on the balcony of his new apartment, gazing out at the city skyline illuminated against the night sky, Nathan felt a sense of peace wash over him. He was no longer defined by the pain of his past, but by the promise of his future. And in that moment, he knew that he was truly unshackled, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead with open arms. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.